It was a day etched in my memory. To all outward appearances, it was a typical Saturday night dinner. Even young Julie was present, spending the weekend as she often did. Julie's mother, Denise, a widow, worked weekend night shifts dispatching for a taxi company. Julie and our daughter, Laura, had been inseparable since high school, frequently having sleepovers at each other's houses. Julie stayed with us most Fridays and Saturdays, while Denise worked her 12-hour night shifts. My ex-wife, Sandy, knew Denise quite well, though I'd never met her. Sandy used to joke that Denise might steal my heart, so she ensured we never crossed paths. At that time, I was frequently traveling for work, striving for success in a fiercely competitive field. Sandy usually managed everything with the kids, and on Sundays, a cab would collect Julie. She adored the occasional treats the cabbies brought, and Laura found the whole arrangement exciting. Returning to that fateful Saturday night, the four of us sat at the dinner table when, out of the blue, Sandy announced, "Peter, I want a divorce. I'm leaving you." Her tone was so casual, it initially felt like a bizarre prank. When your wife of 10 years abruptly declares she wants a divorce, it takes a moment to register. "I'm serious," she insisted. "I want a divorce. I've met someone else and want to spend my life with him." She continued as if it were inconsequential, with 2 8-year-old girls present, including our own daughter. I maintained my composure, perhaps muttering something ridiculous like, "Well, if that's how it is, I guess I'll start looking for an apartment tomorrow." Sandy replied nonchalantly, "No, you'll keep the house. You'll need it for Laura." I put down my fork, ceasing pretense of eating, and simply stared at her. "We're going on a trip around the world," she added, still not making eye contact. "Laura can't miss school," she continued, as if planning a routine weekend getaway. "You've got to be kidding me," I said, a little louder than intended, doing my best to remain calm for the girls' sake. Sandy must have planned this carefully, knowing I wouldn't create a scene in front of the children. "I want to see the world while I'm still young enough to enjoy it," she added, oblivious to the irony. When we first met, I was the avid traveler. I dreamed of exploring the globe after finishing my engineering degree. Sandy and I used to discuss visiting the Grand Canyon, the Rockies, even New Zealand, but she prioritized having children, stating she wanted to experience motherhood while still young. I thought I understood her reasoning. Her parents had been older when they had her, so she wanted to enjoy life with our children while she was still youthful. But apparently, her perspective had shifted. Raising Laura hadn't been as fulfilling as she'd envisioned. The pregnancy and birth hadn't been easy, and she'd quietly abandoned the idea of more children. I almost chuckled at the irony, but instead went outside to prune the rose bushes, needing to do something to clear my head. After a few minutes, I noticed Laura and Julie standing quietly beside me, helping to watch for thorns. "Girls, be careful. You're not wearing gloves," I cautioned. "We're fine, Dad," Laura replied. "What's your mom doing?" I asked. "She's upstairs packing," Laura said, remarkably calmly. A surge of anger washed over me, but I didn't want to vent my frustration on the roses. Instead, I focused on the girls, resisting the urge to storm upstairs. "Sorry, Laura," I mumbled. "Why are you sorry, Daddy?" "You didn't leave us." "Mom did," she answered. "Most of her friends at school had dads who'd left, and she'd rather have a dad who loved her than a mother who—" She left the sentence unfinished. I still wonder what she was going to say. Sandy had always seemed like a devoted mother. As I watched the girls working together on a rose bush, I could hear Sandy on the phone, likely speaking to her new boyfriend. "All right, who wants ice cream?" I asked. The girls cheered, and we headed to a restaurant for the biggest sundaes we could find. They savored them, giving me a few moments to process what had happened and consider my next steps. To my surprise, I wasn't overwhelmingly upset that Sandy was leaving. The love I once felt for her had waned the moment she made her announcement. My primary concern was childcare. I could manage Laura's care, but I'd need help with school drop-offs and vacations. My job wouldn't make juggling the school schedule easy. I realized Julie's mother would have her own challenges. and I'd have mine to contend with. I decided to call my sister Beth to explain the situation and see if she could help. My immediate plan was to see if Beth could pick Laura up from school. It would be a long drive for her, but it might work. She did what? Beth almost shrieked when I explained, keeping the details vague in front of the girls. I realized I didn't know much about Sandy's new relationship. She's left us for some guy named Ron, I told her, trying to suppress my irritation. Ron? A customer at the library, Laura chimed in, and Julie added, Mom said he's one of her regulars. Sandy had been working part-time at the local library, so it made sense. My problem, I continued to Beth, is that I can't pick Laura up from school every day. I can drop her off in the mornings, but getting off work by 2:30 every day is impossible. It's okay, she said. Dad, Julie's mom is going to pick me up, Laura announced. But it wouldn't be fair to expect her to do that every day, I replied. Oh, it's no trouble, Laura responded. We already have a plan. Julie will stay with us on weekends, and during the week I'll stay with Julie and her mom. You can drive us to school on Mondays, and then Julie's mom will handle pickups. Beth, overhearing the arrangement, chimed in. I think that's a brilliant idea, Peter. Did you ask Julie's mom about this? No, I admitted. I've never actually met Julie's mom, so I wasn't sure she'd be up for it. Julie then added, Mom said the cab company wants her to work Sundays, but she didn't want to impose on Laura's mom too much. It seemed the girls had solved the problem for me. What does Julie's mom look like? Beth asked. I paused, realizing I had no idea. I've never actually met her, I confessed. Well, you'd better go introduce yourself soon and see what she thinks of the arrangement, Beth advised. Then she asked, Has Sandy moved out yet? No clue, I replied. We were out at a restaurant. She was still packing when we left. Beth suggested I get new locks while I was in town. Let me know if you need anything tonight. Josh and I can swing by, but we'd have to bring the kids. Thanks, Beth, but I think we're okay, I said, nodding at the girls. They exchanged a grin, and I couldn't help but smile too. Beth wasn't surprised or upset that Sandy was leaving. They were never close. After ice cream, we headed back to the car. I realized I needed to speak with Julie's mother and let her know I'd be the sole adult with the girls that evening, just to ensure she was comfortable. These days, you can never be too cautious, especially since I'd never met Julie's mom. I pulled up to the cab office and left the girls in the car while I went inside. I'm Peter Jackson. I'm looking for Julie's mother, I said to the dispatcher. I vaguely recognized him from one of Julie's Sunday pickups. Oddly, I didn't even know Julie's mom's real name. We all just called her Julie's mother, and Julie called her mom. The dispatcher gestured toward a door marked, Ladies Only, with a sign that read, Denise's office. The other drivers fell silent, their eyes glued to the TV. After what felt like an eternity, Denise appeared. She was strikingly beautiful, simply dressed in a blouse and skirt, yet possessed a natural elegance. Denise, someone's here to see you, the dispatcher announced. Hey, Peter, she said, smiling but with a hint of concern. Is everything okay? Yeah. No. Well, maybe, I replied, feeling awkward. Julie's fine. I just need to talk to you privately. Some of the cabbies started to move, but Denise waved them back, and we stepped outside. What's going on, Peter? You don't look too great, she observed, spotting the girls in the car waving. Sandy left me, I stammered. Talking to Denise felt odd, especially since she recognized me instantly. Her face softened. Oh, Peter, I'm so sorry. Are you okay? Does this mean we're facing a childcare challenge tonight? No, Denise, not at all, I said. I just wanted you to know I'd be watching the girls alone tonight, since we hadn't officially met. I thought you should know. You're fine, Peter. Julie talks about you constantly. She practically thinks of you as a second dad. She even has a photo of you by her bed. Oh, wow. Where did she get that? I asked, surprised. Laura must have given it to her, Denise replied with a small smile. Do you want me to take the night off and bring the girls with me? No, really, it's fine. I'm perfectly capable of watching Julie. I just thought you'd want to be informed. I'm sure she couldn't be in better hands, she said, placing a gentle hand on my arm. I'll come by tomorrow morning to pick her up. You should rest. You have a long shift. I insisted. Maybe we can meet later to go over some plans. If you prefer. I can even drop Julie off. Yes, about the future, Denise replied thoughtfully. But don't worry. We'll figure something out. The girls have been cooking up all kinds of ideas. I smiled, reassured. Denise seemed genuinely relieved. Thanks, Peter. Well, I'll see you tomorrow night. And don't worry, Julie is a joy. She hugged the girls good night, reminding them to behave, and we headed home. But when we pulled into the driveway, I noticed an unfamiliar car parked there. As I stopped at the curb, Sandy stepped out and waved. Where have you been? I've been waiting for hours, she demanded. She barely gave me a chance to reply before curtly announcing she was leaving. The way she acted, you'd think she was someone else entirely. If that's who I think it is, tell him to move his car before I do it myself, I snapped, frustrated by the sight of her new guy's car in our driveway. Sandy gestured at him, and a Jaguar across the street roared to life, pulling away. Ignoring her, I backed into the spot the Jaguar had vacated. She complained that I almost hit her, but I just replied, "Oh, you're still here. I thought you'd left," then walked toward the house. "Not taking your car?" I asked, noticing her Nissan sitting empty while the Jaguar was packed to the brim. "No point. I'll sell it. We're flying out on Wednesday," she replied before I could ask. "Ron's lawyer's address is on the kitchen table," she said flatly, then turned to speak briefly to Laura and Julie. I didn't wait to hear what she said, and went inside, the girls trailing after me. They gave each other a high five, but I pretended not to notice. We watched TV for a bit, and then I sent them to bed. They didn't argue, which was unusual for Laura, but I think they sensed it was time to let me unwind. I poured myself a couple of whiskeys, hoping it would help me sleep. The next morning I woke to the smell of bacon frying. For a split second, I thought Sandy was making breakfast, but then the events of the previous day flooded back. The house felt different, as if all traces of Sandy had been meticulously erased. Even the photos of her parents were gone. I checked the bathroom. Sure enough, her personal belongings had vanished. It seemed someone had cleaned up during the night. "Come on, Dad. Breakfast is getting cold," Laura called from the stairs. In the kitchen, the girls had set everything up like a hotel breakfast buffet. Coffee, juice, fruit, even cornflakes and tea. I complimented them. They beamed. Beth, Josh, and their kids arrived before we finished eating. Despite the minor chaos of a broken coffee maker, the girls managed to serve coffee to Beth and Josh. It took a little encouragement, but soon they left the dishes to go play with their cousins. Meanwhile, Beth started washing up, and Josh and I had coffee while I filled him in on what had happened. They both reassured me they'd help in any way they could. Josh recommended a good divorce lawyer, and Beth whipped up dinner from what we had in the fridge. I spent most of the day tending to the roses, with Julie and Laura popping by now and then to assist. At one point, Julie quoted a line from a song, "It's been a good year for the roses," and it struck a bittersweet chord, given everything that had happened. Around 4:30, a cab pulled up, and Denise arrived. The girls ushered her in, and we properly acquainted ourselves. Beth, Denise, and I discussed the girls' babysitting arrangement. Denise confirmed she'd be taking a Sunday night shift, which paid more than her current schedule. We settled on a plan, with a few minor tweaks, and Beth's occasional help during school breaks. Denise called her boss immediately to confirm the new shift. He agreed on the spot. She glanced at me for approval, and I nodded. We then realized Julie needed her school clothes for the next day, so Beth drove Denise and Julie home to pick them up, with Laura tagging along. As I carried Julie's bag into the house, I asked Denise if she had a car. "I do, or did," she replied. "But since Micah left, I can't really afford to keep one." "Well, what about using Sandy's old car?" I suggested, pointing to Sandy's car in the driveway. "Oh, I can't," Denise said, shaking her head. "Why not?" "She told me to get rid of it," she explained. "But you'll need it to take Laura to and from school," I said. Don't worry about that. Let's call the insurance company and add you as a driver, I insisted. Laura piped up. His name's Ron, Dad. Who cares? I muttered. Ron the Rat sounds better to me, I replied, frustrated. Laura laughed, pointing out that Ron the Rat sounded like a puppet character from her favorite show. I couldn't help but smile and let it go. Over the next few weeks, we adjusted to our new routines. Beth and Josh often visited on Saturdays to check the pantry and sometimes made us lunch. Housework was never my strong suit, but I managed to keep things in order, and Beth never complained. Weekdays felt lonely, but I adapted. Fridays became a highlight when I'd come home to Denise and the girls. Denise usually cooked for us before her Friday night shift, making the empty house a little more bearable. The toughest part was waking up alone every morning. The divorce process was complicated. Sandy and her new guy had skipped the country, bouncing around, which made it difficult for her lawyer to contact her. On top of that, his ex-wife was pursuing child support, and his Italian accounts were frozen. Every so often, Sandy's attorney would call me, and I'd pass along whatever information Laura had managed to glean about her mother's whereabouts. I don't know if Laura fully understood why I needed those details, but her intel ended up helping my case. Sandy's lack of communication with her attorney played in my favor. At one court hearing, her attorney requested another delay, saying he was waiting on a response from her. The judge looked frustrated. "Mr. Jackson, do you know where your wife is?" he asked. "I'm sorry, sir," I answered, standing up. "I haven't spoken with my wife since she left us." I didn't mention her brief calls to Laura every few weeks, as the judge hadn't asked about them. He noted Sandy's unreasonable behavior and declared that I had grounds for desertion. With that, he granted me full custody of Laura. "I don't see how joint custody would work if Mrs. Jackson can't even communicate with her attorney," he said. He then told Sandy's attorney that she had 21 days to appear in court if she wished to challenge his decision. Then, turning back to me, the judge added, "I'm surprised you haven't demanded child support from your wife. Frankly, Your Honor, I doubt there's much hope of collecting it unless she returns to the country," I replied. He ordered a nominal $100 monthly payment, knowing it was unlikely I'd ever see a cent. Still, it set a precedent. He advised my lawyer to look into any assets Sandy might still have in Italy, but I never bothered to follow up. I walked out of court a single man with full custody of Laura and rights to any property Sandy had left behind. On Monday, I noticed an international call in the call log from the day before, likely from Sandy, but neither Laura nor Julie mentioned it. I figured it out but didn't dwell on it. Our new routine kept me busy enough. As time passed, Sandy's calls to Laura became less frequent. It didn't surprise me. They were brief and one-sided. Aside from Laura's subtle questions about her mom's location, which stopped altogether once Ron's divorce was finalized, somehow Laura and Julie found out about it, likely through school connections. The divorce was finalized about 4 months ago. One evening, while we were out for a movie and burgers, Julie casually mentioned that she and her mom might have to move because of a rent increase. I hadn't realized this was part of a carefully orchestrated plan the girls had been hatching, to have Denise and Julie move in with us. That Friday at dinner, Laura casually asked Denise, "So, have you found a new apartment yet?" Julie chimed in with some exaggerated horror stories about their apartment hunt. Then Laura suggested, "Why don't you and Julie just move in with us? We have a spare room." I considered Laura's suggestion, realizing it could work. It would save Denise rent and alleviate her hectic schedule. But when I looked at Denise, she quickly averted her gaze. I didn't want to put her on the spot, so I tried to proceed cautiously. "Well, sometimes people get the wrong idea about a man and a woman living together," I said hesitantly. Denise laughed. "Oh, come on, Peter, you sound like a prude. I was just thinking about your reputation." "My reputation?" She snorted. "You've got to be kidding. The folks at my apartment complex already gossip about me because I'm gone every weekend and drive a new car. They think I'm doing something shady." "You're joking," I said. "Nope," she said. "They even wrote to my landlord. I told them I work at a cab company, but the rumors just won't quit." "You need to get out of there," I replied. "I know, but finding an affordable place isn't easy," she sighed. "But Laura's idea does make sense. There's plenty of space here." Yeah, you're right, I admitted. Without the girls, this place feels like a morgue. And you're not a bad cook either. Should I take that as a compliment? She grinned. Yes, absolutely, I said. The room is yours if you want it. The girls would love to have you both here. Denise hesitated. We have to talk about rent, she suggested. No need, I said. I don't like housekeeping, and you're a much better cook. Maybe you could handle the cooking. I'll cover utilities and cleaning supplies, Denise insisted. We'll work out the details later, but you're sure you want us here? Definitely, I said. So when do you want to move in? Well, our apartment is furnished, but honestly most of it can go. I sold the good stuff years ago after Micah left, she said. So we agreed. Denise and Julie moved in with Laura and me. As we moved her things, I noticed Denise's expression when I asked about Micah. I knew her husband had died in a car accident years ago, but the details were still raw for her. Later, while walking Denise to her car, I heard a loud smack from behind us and saw Laura and Julie looking overly innocent. Denise and Julie moved in the following week. Most of Denise's furniture was discarded, though a few pieces made it into the house, with the rest stored in the garage. Her TV and stereo ended up in the girls' room, and the house felt like a home again. My mood lifted, and I stopped going out for after-work drinks. I had bedtime stories to read now, and my boss started sending others on work trips, letting me stay home. Shortly after Denise moved in, I began to fall for her, though I did my best to keep it to myself. Denise was a year younger than me, always polished and full of humor. She was easygoing with the girls, and somehow put up with my quirks. I realized I'd loved her from the start, though I hadn't fully admitted it. Beth noticed first. During Christmas, while setting the table, she asked, So, have you told Denise yet? Told her what? I asked, clueless. That you're in love with her, you fool, she replied. Don't be ridiculous, Beth, I said. Peter, she said, I can read you like an open book. You're more taken with Denise than you ever were with Judy Reyes. Judy Reyes was my high school crush who'd broken my heart. Beth and her friends had helped me get over it back then. I'm fond of Denise, but I don't want to ruin the balance here, I said. Peter, she said, she likes you as much as you like her. Even the girls can see it. What should you do? Tell her how you feel, Peter. You've won hearts before. Sandy was different, though, I said. You never liked Sandy, did you? No, I didn't, she said. She had you wrapped around her finger, but Denise genuinely cares for you and the girls. Just then, Denise walked into the kitchen to check on dinner, and Beth and I quickly changed the subject. Throughout the meal, Beth kept shooting me knowing looks, even sharing private jokes with Laura and Julie. Over the next few days, I came close to bringing it up with Denise several times, but always chickened out. On New Year's Eve, Denise had to work, and Beth and Josh took the girls so I could go to an office party. I reluctantly agreed. By 4 a.m., the party had died down, and I called a cab. To my surprise, Denise answered. Hey, gorgeous, I slurred. Can you send one of the guys to take me home? Are you serious, Peter? She laughed. I had a tough time deciding which phone number to call, I joked. Try not to get sick in the car, she warned, still laughing. Ted, the driver, arrived and helped me into the cab. As we drove, I realized we weren't headed toward my house. Wrong way, I mumbled. You need someone to put you to bed, and it won't be me, she said. I think I know who will volunteer, Ted chuckled. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, Ted and Denise were helping me out of the cab. Denise clung to my arm as we headed to the door, and Ted helped me upstairs. Denise began loosening my tie and helping me get comfortable. Feeling emboldened, I saw it as my moment. Denise leaned over and I muttered, You know you're one incredibly gorgeous woman. Oh, really, Peter? And what's that supposed to mean? It means you're too good to resist, I slurred. How much have you had to drink tonight? She asked, amused. Not enough, I slurred. If I'd had a bit more, I'd have the guts to... One Saturday while we were at the movies, Julie casually mentioned that she and her mom might have to move because of a rent increase. I hadn't realized this was part of a subtle, long-game strategy the girls had been quietly orchestrating, getting Denise and Julie to move in with us. That Friday at dinner, Laura casually asked Denise, So have you found a new apartment yet? Julie followed up with some exaggeratedly dreadful tales of their apartment search. Then Laura suggested, Why don't you and Julie just move in with us? We have a spare room. I considered Laura's suggestion, seeing its practicality. It would eliminate Denise's rent and significantly reduce her demanding schedule. But when I glanced at Denise, she quickly looked away. I didn't want to pressure her, so I approached the subject carefully. Well, sometimes people get the wrong idea about a man and a woman living together, I said cautiously. Denise chuckled. Oh, come on, Peter, you sound like a prude. I was just thinking about your reputation. My reputation? She scoffed. You've got to be kidding. The people in my building already gossip about me because I'm gone every weekend and drive a nice car. They think I'm up to something shady. You're joking, I said. Nope, she said. They even complained to my landlord. I told them I work for a cab company, but the rumors persist. You need to get out of there, I replied. I know, but finding an affordable place isn't easy, she sighed. But Laura's idea does make sense. There's plenty of space here. Yeah, you're right, I agreed. Without the girls, this place feels like a tomb, and you're not a bad cook either. Should I take that as a compliment? She grinned. Absolutely, I said. The room is yours if you want it. The girls would love to have you both here. Denise hesitated. We have to discuss rent, she suggested. No need, I said. I hate housework, and you're a far better cook. Maybe you could handle the cooking. I'll cover utilities and cleaning supplies. Denise insisted. We'll work out the details later, but you're sure you want us here? Absolutely, I replied. So, when are you planning to move in? Well, our apartment is furnished, but honestly, most of it can go. I sold the good stuff years ago after Micah left, she said. And so, it was settled. Denise and Julie moved in with Laura and me. As we moved her belongings, I noticed Denise's expression when I asked about Micah. I knew her husband had died in a car accident years ago, but the pain was still very fresh for her. Later, while walking Denise to her car, I heard a loud smack behind us and saw Laura and Julie looking innocently unconcerned. Denise and Julie moved in the following week. Most of Denise's furniture was discarded, though a few pieces found their way into the house, with the rest stored in the garage. Her TV and stereo ended up in the girls' room, and the house felt like a home again. My spirits lifted, and I stopped going out for after-work drinks. I had bedtime stories to read now, and my boss started assigning more work to others, allowing me to work from home more often. Soon after Denise moved in, I began to fall for her, though I tried to keep it to myself. Denise was a year younger than me, always put together and full of humor. She was easygoing with the girls and remarkably tolerant of my quirks. I realized I had loved her from the beginning, even if I hadn't fully acknowledged it until then. Beth was the first to notice. During Christmas dinner, while setting the table, she asked, So, have you told Denise yet? Told her what? I asked, completely oblivious. That you're in love with her, you nitwit, she exclaimed. Don't be ridiculous, Beth, I said. Peter, she said, I can read you like a book. You're far more smitten with Denise than you ever were with Judy Reyes. Judy Reyes was my high school crush, the one who'd broken my heart. Beth and her friends had helped me get over her back then. I'm fond of Denise, but I don't want to upset the balance, I said. Peter, she said, she likes you just as much. Even the girls can see it. Tell her how you feel, Peter. You've won hearts before. Sandy was different, though, I said. You never liked Sandy, did you? No, she stated. She had you wrapped around her finger. But Denise genuinely cares for you and the girls. Just then, Denise walked into the kitchen to check on dinner, and Beth and I quickly changed the subject. Throughout the meal, Beth kept giving me knowing looks, even sharing inside jokes with Laura and Julie. Over the next few days, I almost brought it up with Denise several times, but always backed down. On New Year's Eve, Denise had to work, and Beth and Josh took the girls so I could attend an office party. I reluctantly agreed. By 4 a.m., the party was winding down, and I called a cab. To my surprise, Denise answered. Hey, gorgeous, I slurred. Can you send one of the guys to take me home? Are you serious, Peter? She laughed. I had a tough time deciding which number to call, I joked. Try not to throw up in the car, she warned, still laughing. Ted, the driver, arrived and helped me into the cab. As we drove, I realized we weren't heading home. Wrong way, I mumbled. You need someone to tuck you into bed, and it won't be me, she said. I think I know someone who will volunteer, Ted chuckled. I must have fallen asleep because the next thing I knew, Ted and Denise were helping me out of the cab. Denise held my arm as we walked to the door, and Ted helped me upstairs. Denise started loosening my tie and getting me comfortable. Feeling bold, I seized the moment. Denise leaned over and I mumbled, "You know you're an incredibly gorgeous woman." "Oh, really, Peter? And what's that supposed to mean?" she asked. "It means you're irresistible," I slurred. "How much have you had to drink?" she asked, amused. "Not enough," I slurred. "If I'd had more, I'd have the guts to tell you how much I love you," I admitted. She smiled. "Tell me when you're sober and maybe I'll believe you. Now get some sleep." She started to leave, but I gently held her arm and pulled her down beside me. She didn't resist, and I soon drifted off. The next morning, as sunlight flooded the room and my headache pounded, I was disappointed to find Denise wasn't beside me. I tried to lift my head and groaned in pain. "Here, drink this." I heard Denise's voice behind me. "What is it?" I asked, squinting against the sunlight. "Relax, it's not poison. That'll wait until you marry me. I need that life insurance first," she teased. "Oh yeah? How do you know I won't beat you to it?" I replied, attempting a clever comeback. "You couldn't, Peter. You have 2 daughters depending on you," she said with a smirk. "One of them is yours, remember?" I reminded her. "They see themselves as sisters, and they see you as their father," she noted. "Well, Laura has started calling you Mom, too. She's even said it a few times recently," she added, seemingly surprised I hadn't noticed. "And Julie's been calling me Dad for at least a month," I added. "Really?" she said, astonished. "Yes," I confirmed. "Even Beth and Josh noticed." "Did you discuss it with Beth on Boxing Day?" she inquired. "Oh, we discussed plenty," I replied, trying to keep the conversation light despite my hangover. "I think she's already planning her outfit for the wedding," I joked. Denise sat beside me, holding the drink she'd made, looking thoughtful. Breaking the silence, I asked, "So, are you going to marry me or what?" "You haven't asked me yet," she pointed out. "I wanted to gauge your answer first. Less embarrassing if you say no," I explained. "Well, it wouldn't hurt to ask," she replied, a glint of humor in her eye. But I sensed something unsaid. "I have a confession," she began. "I'm not a widow. Micah isn't dead." A wave of confusion washed over me. "Wait, what? Micah was a bigamist?" "He was already married when he married me, so our marriage was invalid," she explained calmly. "Wow, so you're not actually a widow and you were never legally married," I clarified. "Exactly," she admitted with a shrug. "It's just easier to let people think I'm a widow." In that case, I felt bolder. "Would you do me the honor of—" But then we got distracted, and before I knew it, we were wrapped up in each other, kissing and laughing. By the time Josh dropped the girls off around 3 p.m., Denise and I were in the kitchen, figuring out how to break the news. The girls seemed to pick up on it immediately, probably because Denise was practically sitting on my lap. They hugged us both, and when Josh came in, he chuckled. "Congratulations." We set a date for mid-February and planned a simple celebration. Though the girls dreamed of something grand, we settled on a modest event with a registry office ceremony and a small reception afterward. Neither of us had many close relatives, and the registry office gave Denise peace of mind, avoiding the need for public announcements. Simpler, considering her widow status. After Josh left, Denise had the awkward task of resigning from her job at the cab company. She didn't want to work night shifts anymore, though that meant I'd miss her during those nights. We agreed to sleep in separate bedrooms until the wedding, setting a good example for the girls. Yet, once the girls were back in school, I developed the habit of coming home for extended lunch breaks, which significantly boosted my morale. The following weekend, Denise worked her last shifts at the cab office. Her colleagues showered her with flowers and chocolates, and on Sunday night, several drivers and their wives took us out for a farewell dinner at a local pub. There wasn't a cab to be found in town that night. Our wedding day arrived quickly and went off without a hitch. The girls were perfect bridesmaids, and Denise looked stunning. We spent our wedding night in a honeymoon suite at a luxury hotel where we held the reception, while Beth and Josh took the girls home. We planned to spend most of the school summer vacation traveling together as a family. That first year, we spent 5 weeks exploring Florida, the Caribbean, and Arizona, packing in as much as we could. A couple of weeks after the wedding, I noticed something was bothering Denise. The girls were happy, but Denise seemed troubled. Once they were in bed, I asked her what was on her mind. "Peter," she said, her face worried, "does Julie know that Micah isn't actually dead?" Her question took me completely by surprise. "How would she know? We've never discussed it with them," I replied. Denise explained that the girls had started hiding photos of Sandy and Micah in their drawers. When she'd asked Julie why, Julie had replied, "They don't need us. We don't want to see their pictures." Julie knew her father hadn't died in an accident. He'd left, though she didn't know the full story. Denise had decided not to elaborate, not wanting to burden Julie with the fact that she was technically illegitimate. Surprisingly, Julie didn't seem affected by the truth. If anything, it seemed to strengthen the bond between her and Laura. Denise turned out to be a remarkable wife and mother. She was endlessly patient with the girls and with me, even when things got stressful at work. Despite my flaws, Denise never complained and maintained a playful sense of humor that brightened every day. Our evenings were often busy, but always filled with warmth and laughter. By early summer, Sandy's calls to Laura had almost completely ceased. Laura's resentment towards her mother grew, and she subtly started referring to Denise as "new mom" during their infrequent conversations. When Sandy did call, Laura would discuss our family activities, referring to Denise as Dad's wife and Julie as my sister. Denise and I discussed Laura's approach, but we realized we couldn't control her feelings. Sandy would have to face the consequences of her actions. Before summer vacation ended, Laura and Julie started asking if Denise and I were truly their mom and dad. They left adoption brochures lying around the house, subtly hinting at Denise adopting Laura and me adopting Julie. They even found forms to change Julie's last name to Jackson. After discussing it, Denise and I decided to pursue both adoptions, though Julie's father still held legal rights. Our attorney, who had handled my divorce, managed the process. It took over a year, but we eventually terminated Micah's parental rights and finalized the adoptions. Coincidentally, the same judge from my divorce case oversaw Micah's parental rights termination. Officially, we became Mr. and Mrs. Jackson, with our daughters Laura and Julie. We considered having more children, but decided against it. Not long after the wedding, I received a promotion with a significant salary increase, allowing me to take on more responsibility at work. This opened up opportunities for family trips, fulfilling the travel dreams I'd once held, but never realized. In our second year, we spent 5 weeks in Europe, the third year in Thailand and Vietnam, and the fourth in Indonesia and Malaysia. By the fifth summer, Laura and Julie, now 14, were meticulously documenting everything on their video cameras. That year, we planned a trip through Canada, the northern U.S., and Alaska, with the girls eagerly drafting detailed itineraries. About 2 years into our marriage, Sandy started sending Christmas cards with Canadian stamps, suggesting she and Ron had settled there. We never responded. She'd left no return address. Sandy was rarely mentioned, and she hadn't contacted Laura in years, so we didn't dwell on it. Our ambitious travel plans changed when the girls pointed out we couldn't visit every destination in a single summer. After revising our list, we decided to focus on the West that year and save the East for later. We arrived in Ontario in late June and spent a couple of days exploring its historic sites. From there, we drove west through Manitoba and Saskatchewan, then south into the states of Nebraska and Kansas, before looping back north through Colorado and Wyoming, where we stayed at a dude ranch. The ranch was lovely, though I found the western saddles a bit nerve-wracking compared to the English saddles I was used to. Eventually, we reached Montana and stopped in a town I'd always wanted to visit, probably because I'd read about it in some western novel. After checking into a motel, we headed to a nearby diner. It was crowded and noisy, but suddenly a loud clatter silenced the place. A waitress had dropped a tray of food, and as we turned to see what happened, I recognized her. She stared back, equally stunned, her hand trembling as she looked down at the scattered food. Denise recognized her too, and we exchanged glances before turning to our girls. "Nothing to worry about, Laura." "Eat your dinner," Denise reassured her. "Same to you, Julie," I added, each of us instinctively addressing our own daughter first. Even 5 years after the adoption, the other diners, realizing we were somehow connected to the incident, kept glancing at us. Laura quickly recognized the woman, muttered, "So be it," and returned to her meal. Julie hesitated a little longer, then smiled at me, glanced at her mother, and went back to eating. As we headed to the car, Denise whispered to me, "I guess the grass wasn't as green as it looked on the other side." "What do you mean?" I asked. "If she's working here, she's probably no longer with Ron. One of them likely cheated," she said. "Once a cheater, always a cheater," I replied. Leaving her daughter was like cheating too. It doesn't matter if she didn't cheat on me. Denise shrugged. "Only if she tries to stir up trouble now. Laura's been through enough." "It's too late for her to cause any real trouble," I said. "Laura handled it better than I did, that's for sure." "The girls," Denise started, then trailed off. "Don't say it," I said. "I know how clever they are, and I'm thankful for it. I just wonder how far their plans go," I added with a grin. Denise chuckled. "I wouldn't worry. I think everything is just as it should be." We reached the car, and I unlocked the doors. The kids piled into the back seats, and I opened the front door for Denise. She paused, then wrapped her arms around my neck and kissed me. From the back seat, the girls murmured and cheered, teasing us with comments like, "Not in public," and "Wait until you're in your room." Despite their playful remarks, both girls possessed a maturity beyond their years. Julie had lost her father at 6, and Laura's mother had left when she was only 8. Denise broke the kiss, whispering, "We have an audience." I glanced over my shoulder to see Sandy standing in the diner doorway, watching us intently. "Do you think Laura should—" Denise began. "Yeah," I replied, knowing this moment was inevitable. Laura would need to meet her mother, and I wanted it to be on her own terms. Denise leaned against the car as I spoke to Laura. "Your mom is here, I think. You should go see her," Denise said. "Do I have to?" Laura sighed. "She is your mother, and you might regret not taking this chance," Denise encouraged gently. With a reluctant shrug, Laura stepped out of the car. She looked back at us several times before walking slowly towards Sandy, stopping about 10 feet away. Sandy said something I couldn't quite hear, and took a step toward Laura, but Laura instantly backed away. It was frustrating not being able to hear their conversation, though it seemed Laura was doing most of the talking. Each time Sandy tried to get closer, Laura retreated. "This isn't looking good," Denise muttered, closely watching the interaction. "I know," I replied, feeling the tension. Eventually, Laura turned and ran back to the car, jumped in, slammed the door, and buckled her seatbelt without a word. Sandy disappeared back into the diner. I was ready to drive off, but Denise had other plans. She was already halfway to the door before Laura finished buckling in. I waited, letting Denise handle it. She returned about 10 minutes later, her expression clearly indicating, "Not here. Let's talk later." I started the car, and we drove to our next stop, a quiet spot along the river, where we planned to take a walk and see the waterfalls the town was famous for. The dams had diminished their natural beauty, but they were still impressive. Denise and I never overdo the hiking, so we let the girls go ahead, giving us a chance to talk privately. "So what did she say?" I asked. "Turns out he left her," Denise replied. 2 years ago. He dumped her for a waitress in this town. It's exactly what we guessed. "I wonder why she didn't just go back to Italy," I said, shaking my head. "She was left with the motel bill. The owner offered her work in the restaurant to pay it off. Now she shares a room with another woman, both working days in the restaurant and nights in the bar," Denise explained. "Sounds like a lovely setup," I muttered sarcastically. "So what does she do for fun? Hanging out with barflies?" "Peter, don't be so harsh," Denise replied calmly. "She made her mistakes, and she's paying the price now. Anyway, she'll meet with you after her restaurant shift at 6. I'll take the girls out for dinner so you two can talk." "And what am I supposed to say to her?" I asked, frustrated. "Peter, you need closure," Denise said. "Whatever you believe, she's still Laura's mother, and that counts for something." "Too bad she didn't think of that before," I said bitterly. "She regrets what she did, Peter." Denise's voice softened. "She wants to apologize to you and Laura, even if Laura isn't ready to accept it yet. Just take this time and talk with her. We don't want to lose Laura over this." I looked at Denise thoughtfully. "You're a lot more forgiving about this than I expected, especially after what Micah did to you." "Peter," Denise replied, "holding on to hate doesn't help anyone. What Micah did to me was worse than what Sandy did to you or Laura. For a long time I hated him and the other women he tricked. But one day, When I was sitting in the police station with those women, I realized we'd all been deceived. We weren't to blame. So we became friends, not rivals. Now, if he shows up, I'll report him to the police. But I won't spend a second hating him. I have people who matter far more. Denise kissed my cheek. Besides, think about it. If Sandy hadn't left, where would we be now? You're right, I admitted with a sigh. Thank you, Denise. Now let's hurry. It's almost 4, she said, glancing at her watch. I waited in the restaurant parking lot until Sandy came out after her shift. She emerged with another woman who gave me a scrutinizing look before heading off. Sandy looked nervous, a shadow of the confident woman I remembered, but remarkably the same. Hi, Peter. Thanks for coming, she greeted me, her voice uncertain. The bar's empty. Let's go there and talk, I replied, gesturing for her to lead the way. She led us to a booth in the back, clearly expecting me. The other woman, now behind the bar, exchanged a few words with the bartender, and all the nearby booths were emptied. Once we were seated, Sandy took a deep breath. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, Peter, she whispered. You've done me a favor, I replied simply, not wanting to prolong this. Denise got the better end of the deal, she said, bitterness lacing her tone. I should have known she'd move in as soon as I left. It wasn't like that, I replied. From the moment I met Denise, I knew I wanted to be with her. Maybe I would have left if I'd known her first, but who knows? I don't think I would have. I'm not one to walk away from my responsibilities. I paused, reflecting. So, what happened to Ron? Oh, that fortune he flaunted was a lie, she replied, her tone turning dark. He left his wife and kids with nothing, and she seized what little he had. He was wanted for fraud, stealing from people. I wouldn't be surprised if that's why he left me, too. The last I heard, he slipped across the border into Canada when the FBI started closing in, took off with a waitress. Ironically, now I'm working the job she left behind. Did the FBI come after you too? I asked. Yeah, but I cut a deal. If I'm willing to testify against him, they agreed to go easy on me. I'm on probation for 2 years, restricted to this area until they find him. I report every week, but it's manageable since the sheriff's deputy Tex works nearby, she said with a sigh. And are you still paying off his debts? I inquired. I've nearly cleared them, but there's still a little left, she admitted. Seeing her struggle, I pulled out my checkbook. She started to protest, but I insisted. For once, Sandy, do as you're told, I said firmly. This should clear. You should go see her, Denise said. Do I have to? Laura sighed. The weight of the decision was evident in her voice. She is your mother, and you might regret not taking this chance, Denise gently encouraged. With a reluctant shrug, Laura got out of the car. She glanced back at us several times before slowly walking toward Sandy, stopping about 10 feet away. Sandy said something I couldn't quite make out and took a step closer, but Laura immediately retreated. It was frustrating not being able to hear their conversation, but it seemed Laura was doing most of the talking, pulling back each time Sandy attempted to close the distance. This isn't going well, Denise murmured, her eyes fixed on the unfolding scene. I know, I replied, feeling the tension build. Finally, Laura turned and ran back to the car, jumped in, slammed the door, and buckled her seatbelt without a word. Sandy disappeared back into the diner. I was ready to leave, but Denise had other ideas. Before Laura had even finished fastening her seatbelt, Denise was already halfway to the diner. I waited, letting her handle the situation. She returned about 10 minutes later, her expression saying, "Not now. Let's talk later." We drove to our next destination, a quiet spot along the river where we planned to walk and see the waterfalls the town was known for. The dams had altered their natural beauty, but they were still impressive. Denise and I let the girls proceed ahead, providing us with some private time. So what did she say? I asked. Turns out he left her, Denise revealed. 2 years ago. He dumped her for a waitress in this town, just as we suspected. I wonder why she didn't just go back to Italy, I mused, shaking my head. She was stuck with a huge motel bill. The owner offered her work at the restaurant to pay it off. Now she shares a room with another woman, working days at the restaurant and nights at the bar, Denise explained. Sounds idyllic, I said sarcastically. What does she do for fun? Hang out with barflies? I asked. Peter, don't be so harsh, Denise said calmly. She made mistakes, and she's paying the price. Anyway, she'll meet with you after her shift at 6. I'll take the girls out for dinner so you two can talk. And what am I supposed to say to her? I asked, still frustrated. Peter, you need closure, Denise said. Whatever your feelings, she's still Laura's mother, and that means something. Too bad she didn't think of that before, I retorted. She regrets what she did, Peter. Denise's tone softened. She wants to apologize to you and Laura, even if Laura isn't ready to forgive her yet. Just talk to her. We don't want to lose Laura over this. I looked at Denise thoughtfully. You're a lot more forgiving than I expected, especially after what Micah did to you. Peter, Denise said, holding on to hate doesn't help anyone. What Micah did to me was far worse than what Sandy did to you or Laura. For a long time I hated him and the other women he'd deceived. But one day, sitting in the police station with those women, I realized we'd all been victims. We weren't to blame. We became friends, not rivals. Now, if he shows up, I'll report him, but I won't waste a second hating him. I have people who matter far more. She kissed my cheek. And think about it. If Sandy hadn't left, where would we be now? You're right, I admitted, sighing. Thank you, Denise. Now let's hurry. It's almost 4, she said, checking her watch. I waited in the restaurant parking lot until Sandy finished her shift. She emerged with another woman, who gave me a sharp look before leaving. Sandy looked nervous, a shadow of the confident woman I remembered. Hi, Peter. Thanks for coming, she greeted me, her voice uncertain. The bar's empty. Let's talk there, I said, gesturing for her to lead the way. She led us to a secluded booth in the back. The other woman, now behind the bar, spoke briefly with the bartender, and all the nearby booths were cleared. Sandy took a deep breath. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, Peter, she whispered. You did me a favor, I replied simply, wanting to keep it brief. Denise got the better end of the deal, she said, bitterness in her voice. I should have known she'd move in as soon as I left. It wasn't like that, I said. From the moment I met Denise, I knew I wanted to be with her. Maybe I would have left if I'd met her first, but who knows? I don't think so. I don't walk away from my responsibilities. I paused. So, what happened with Ron? That fortune he flaunted was a lie, she said, her voice dark. He left his wife and kids with nothing, and she seized his meager assets. He was wanted for fraud, stealing from people. I wouldn't be surprised if that's why he left me, too. Last I heard, he fled to Canada when the FBI closed in, took off with a waitress. Ironically, I'm now working her old job. Did the FBI come after you, I asked? Yeah, but I made a deal. If I testify against him, they'll go easy on me. I'm on probation for 2 years, restricted to this area until they catch him. I report weekly, but it's manageable since Deputy Tex works nearby. She sighed. Still paying off his debts, I asked. Almost cleared, but a little left, she admitted. Seeing her struggle, I pulled out my checkbook. She protested, but I insisted. For once, Sandy, do as you're told, I said firmly. This will cover your debt and give you a little cushion if you decide to return to Italy. I'll help you get settled. But remember, this doesn't mean you can interfere in our lives. The court stripped you of all parental rights to Laura, I said, reminding her of the legal reality. She made that clear earlier, Sandy confirmed, looking down. Oh, I'm sorry, that's not why I wanted to talk to you, she said. I know, I replied. I realize that now, Peter. I was foolish. I never meant to hurt you or Laura. I got caught up in Ron's promises, and it wasn't worth it. I appreciate the apology, Sandy, but that's all in the past, I said. Laura and I have moved on. Denise and I will try to ensure Laura stays in touch, but understand she has a new life now. That's more than I deserve, Peter. I don't deserve this check either, she said, holding it hesitantly. You'd better take it, Sandy. It'll help me sleep better knowing I did what I could. We'll be by tomorrow morning for breakfast. Maybe you can say a proper goodbye to Laura. Her voice shook as she replied, Thank you, Peter. You're being kinder than I deserve. No, Sandy, I said, standing up. You're Laura's mother, and I can't change that. I added, I'd like to get back to my family. Of course. I'm sorry, Peter, she whispered as I walked away without looking back. When I found Denise and the girls, they were waiting, all eyes on me. I pulled Denise aside, gave her a brief summary, and mentioned the check. She doesn't deserve your kindness, Denise said. That's exactly what she said, I replied, kissing my wife. But thank you for being there, I added, feeling grateful for her unwavering support. Later, I pulled Laura aside. I was about to launch into the "you only have one birth mother" speech when she said Denise and Julie had already covered it. Laura planned to talk to her mother at breakfast the next morning, but insisted that either Julie or I be there with her. When I asked why, she simply replied, "Because someone was always with me at the funeral." I let it go at that. The next morning, Laura, Julie, and Sandy sat at a nearby table, talking for a while. I assumed Sandy's coworkers were covering her shift because she didn't seem rushed. The only part of the conversation I overheard was the two girls excitedly discussing the roses growing in our garden. They all smiled throughout, and as we were leaving, Sandy came over, hugged the girls, and gave them each a goodbye kiss. Unexpectedly, she turned to Denise and me. These two were lucky. They found the best mom and dad they could ever have, she said softly, surprising me. Then she turned and hurried back to the diner, and I suspected she was crying as she went. I kissed Denise, and we got in the car, driving north toward the Canadian border. From the way the girls gazed out the back window, I could tell they weren't looking back with any regret. After we returned home, Sandy kept in touch periodically. Denise made a point of writing to her regularly, though we never learned if the FBI ever caught Ron. Less than a year later, we received news that Sandy was marrying her deputy sheriff Tex, as everyone called him. We debated attending the wedding but ultimately declined as a family. However, I felt compelled to go alone, so I slipped away for a few days. Tex turned out to be a decent guy. He picked me up at the airport and introduced me to his friends and family. From what I gathered, Sandy had been completely open with him, admitting her past mistakes. Tex had even arranged for some trucker friends to send her Christmas cards from all over Canada, likely to conceal her actual circumstances. Giving my ex-wife away at her wedding was strange, but maybe it was the closure I needed. Over the following years, we learned Sandy had 2 sons with Tex, though we never met them. Laura and Julie kept in touch with their half-brothers as they grew up, though they rarely mentioned them to us. Laura and Julie eventually married 2 brothers, and the 2 remained as close as ever, playing such a significant role in their marriages that I almost felt sorry for their husbands. When our girls put their heads together, no one, including me, could keep up. Both had 2 children, and amusingly, their daughters were born not only close in date, but also almost right next door to each other. Denise and I have loved watching our grandchildren grow, seeing glimpses of their mothers in them every day. Last year I retired as managing director, and now Denise and I are finally enjoying an 8-month world tour. We've talked about settling down somewhere, but something tells me our family will eventually pull us back to Italy. The girls refuse to let us sell the house, claiming they'd never part with the garden roses. They spend so much time there. I still get updates from them. Just this morning, while checking my messages, I found a photo of my garden with the caption, "It's been a good year for the roses. Life goes on, and that's all there is to it."